And we're live. Welcome to another week of the Questioning Commission. My name's Chase. As always, I'm joined by.
My name is Gonzogo Shemapumulo. It's a Sunday, a good day to be alive. We are taking a bit of a different approach, exploring something new this week. We're trying to hop into visuals. We've been told there's a need for visuals as well to kind of help and work with the audio as well. So we're trying to give that a go this week. And here we go. Yeah, it's kind of exciting, a bit of nerves here and there, to be honest with you. But let's give it a go, see what happens. What are we talking about today?
100%. Today we're looking at the graveyard of empires, Afghanistan. It's a lot has been said. It's dominating the news, and we thought, with our backgrounds in security and so forth, we just give it a go. We try to explain what is exactly going on, because everybody says this happened, that happened, and there is two sides to this story. So I think we're going to try to decipher both sides of the story and just give you like a broader context to this. And as Quinzo mentioned, if you find this interesting, we might have a graphic or two in this thing. Or if you just want to see our face, come on YouTube. It'll be there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to trying out this new format. So I think without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So do you just want to start us off with like a little background into it?
Yeah, I think before we actually even get to that, right, I think it's kind of important to signify and state how we'll be going about this. And obviously, we don't have enough time to cover all points of the story. And to some degree, you might say that you're not objective because you don't really have the perspective of the Taliban, because they choose to share what they want to share at particular points in time. That kind of makes it difficult to get where they stand on the whole matter of domination, invasion, US troops and allies, and whatever the case might be. So our approach will kind of be simple, but very deep diving as well. So we're going to first look at why the USA went to Afghanistan. It's well noted, it's well known, but just to rehash the point and be clear on why they went to Afghanistan. Secondly, we're going to look at who the Taliban is, because a lot has been said, as you've pointed out earlier. A lot has been said about them, the kind of people. They also want to look at who they are, why they exist, and kind of look at what life was like under them between 1996 and 2001. And then most importantly, towards the end, we're going to try and look at what has been dominating the news, the money spent, the lives lost, and other related matters as well. So without further ado, we can get the ball rolling and kick us off.
I just want to preface this once and for all. The views represented in this podcast represent only ours and not any organization or person that we're affiliated with and so forth. And the reason that we're talking about this is, usually we talk about South African topics and so forth. And it's, as much as you try to be unbiased and neutral about it, it's hard when you're South African to talk about South African things without coming from a standpoint. And I think that's why we're also tackling Afghanistan, because we have no skin in the game. We're going to call a spade, and whatever it is, both have messed up on other sides. This isn't an American podcast, it's not an Afghanistan podcast. This is the Questioning Commission, and we question everything.
So be it African, American, European, if there's a question to be asked, we will ask this question out of fear or favor. So let's get the ball rolling and see what we can make of this. So it's September 11th, it's 2001, and I was probably in grade 3 or something, or grade 1, I'm not quite sure, but I was quite young at that point in time, and I don't quite remember what I was doing and where I was. But the Twin Towers in America were attacked. It was called a terrorist attack, and both of them collapsed. A number of people lost their lives because 2 planes were hijacked, and it was believed that the people behind the attacks were Al-Qaeda. So that in itself then brought about what we came to know as the fight against terrorism, to try and end global terrorism, wherever it comes from, be it Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And then as such, it was believed that the people behind the terrorist attack on September 11th were Al-Qaeda, and it was believed that they had a safe haven in Afghanistan. They were being propped up in Afghanistan and trying to find a safe haven there. And it was believed that a number of the leaders had lived and or were living in Afghanistan. And as such, then the president at the time, President George W. Bush Jr., decided to then invade and send his troops over to Afghanistan. And then they were there for over 20 years and a couple of months. And a lot has happened in between the lines. And clearly that's not the whole plot of the story, because there are other countries involved as well, whereby the Americans went to those countries to say, we think they might be here, we think they might have weapons that might, in the long run, cause some harm to us. And then as such, a lot has happened in the Middle East, a lot of instability. And here we are today. So do you want to kind of add those countries that the Americans also visited to say, these countries might also be involved in these terrorist attacks, and just kind of plug those holes that have left there?
So, it's hard to differentiate because, for example, the Taliban, they're nomadic people, they're constantly moving. So it's important to note that, like, in the wake of all this, so you obviously had the Mujahideen in the 90s and 80s fighting the Soviets, right? And everybody was described this as like this holy war, and lots of people joined from all walks of life, and the Mujahideen had Uzbeks in it, it had Pakistanis, it had Indians, it had, a variety of people, the Pashto tribes and so forth. And so you can't say necessarily, hey, the Taliban is just Afghani, Al-Qaeda is just Afghani. We've seen various people. I mean, you could even go to say that, ISIS, for example, right? And they're two different scales, but ISIS has Western recruits. So it's hard to narrow point down exactly who and where everything was. And just another point to add to what you did was in the wake of 9/11, George W. Bush wanted Osama, and he went to the Taliban and the African Afghani government, and they were like, give it to me, otherwise we're going to go with you. And obviously the Afghanis, they wanted to protect their people and so forth. And ultimately they called the bluff of the Americans. They thought nothing was going to happen, and war coincided. And it's also important to note that Osama bin Laden's from the United Arab Emirates. He's not born in Afghanistan, as many believe. He was actually a wealthy businessman, and then he gave it up. He lost favor with his father, and he gave it all up to become a jihadi, as one might call it. So there's a lot of links. And just to touch on one last point, Afghanistan has always been at war. And first, it was the British that tried to invade it and use it as a buffer zone between Russia and China. And then in the 90s, Afghanistan became a socialist. The 80s, Afghanistan became a socialist state. And this really angered the Russians, and they went in to invade. And the Americans, the CIA is well documented, actually started providing weapons and arms to the Afghanis and Mujahideen to fight the Russians. I mean, they were shooting down Russian airplanes in the mountains with these propelled ballistic RPGs and so forth. So all the tactics, many of the tactics from the older Mujahideen, which later migrated to the Taliban, was tactics learned from the CIA. I mean, it's well documented. So, there's been amalgamation, and the CIA has always had a large presence in this. And this relationship goes long before the 9/11 and so forth. So it's important to note that there was a relation, even a working relationship between the Mujahideen and America and so forth. And that's kind of what gave weight to these rumors that Osama was actually working alongside or on the Americans' radars as like a friendly person. And then obviously post 9/11, he was persona non grata in a sense. So if you just want to highlight who the Taliban is and so forth.
Yeah, apologies about that. I think that's part of the learning process, is to try to delve into this whole new nature of having visuals and graphics as well involved as we try to make sense of this Taliban situation and to try to move forward. But the Taliban are they're quite a contentious group. They raise quite a lot of, roughly quite a number of feathers, because some people support the Taliban, some people say the Taliban is bad. And depending on where you come from, right, it's up to you to choose, because you could easily find a way of saying the Taliban are good for this, that, and the other. some say they're not good. But look, I'll borrow here from the BBC, right? They've presented this very good article that was published on the 18th of August, quite recently, as things have picked up steam in Afghanistan. And they mentioned quite a number of important points regarding the Taliban. So I'll just quickly skim off the top here and then we can move on from there on, right? So here they state that the Taliban emerged in the 1990s in northern Pakistan following the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Afghanistan, okay? And it is believed that the Taliban is predominantly Pashtun movement, first appeared in religious seminars, mostly paid by money from Saudi Arabia. And then from there on, they moved to present the Taliban leadership structure. I'd like to share the screen here, if you could allow me to do so, just to kind of give the people watching a sense of what I'm talking about here. So this would be the screen in question. Okay, so let's go here and see if we can share this. Okay, let's share. So this will be Taliban leadership structure. Can you see the screen here? Yeah, so this will be here. Okay, the former Taliban Chief Justice, leader since 2016, authority on political, religious matters and military affairs. And then if you take a look here, you can see that it's quite a complex structure and it's well put out with quite a number of people involved. And if you look at it, right, there are sectors of this, the military, intelligence, political, economic. Important here, the economic is how the Taliban makes money. They've been known to sell drugs, arms, and other forms of trying to make money as well. So in essence, the Taliban is a group that believes in Sharia law, and they believe that the people of Afghanistan should live under Sharia law, which is quite a strict version of the laws that the people currently live under in Afghanistan. So the Taliban quickly extended the influence in 1995 and captured the province of Herat. And this article really captures what the Taliban was doing. Let me stop sharing here very quickly. So in terms of this, right, the Taliban then came into power in 1996 to 2001, and then after 2001, they were toppled when the Americans paid a visit to Afghanistan, a visit that lasted for over 20 years, or close to 20 years, some would say. And then they have quite a number of rules that are, for we that live in democracies, might find a bit contentious. They've banned the television, they banned music and cinemas, they disapproved of girls aged 10 going to school. They were accused of various human rights violations and cultural abuses. So they are a group that's quite extremist from particular points of view, but it's also important to note that the Taliban is also a group that has received quite a great amount of support within Afghanistan from particular sections. So they are anti-Western, they're more about Sharia law, and they don't really allow much room for human rights. And I think that's where the problem is for most people. They don't really allow for human rights, especially girls and women, in terms of going to school, being able to get a job, and all those things, which for us in democracies are part of normal life. So in essence, that's who the Taliban would be. But obviously, there's quite a number of links now. If you try to look at the structures I showed you earlier on, number of links to other countries and the governments and other organizations as well that are defined as terrorist groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And as such, the return of the Taliban now marks then a number of worries about then the return of Al-Qaeda, the return of ISIS or the rise of ISIS, and what this means for safety in the West. So that's what the Taliban is, and that's the guys that are coming into power. Would probably like to add something to that, something that I've probably missed that's important regarding who the Taliban is.
So in terms of, I just wanted to add, I mean, you kind of glossed over everything, and that was very good, well encompassed there. But it's also important to note that before the Taliban government was overthrown and replaced by Hamid Karzai in 2001, they had almost 90% of the control of the territory. And that number has actually risen up to like 98% now that they've taken power again. So it was quite quick. And I think what has put the Taliban back in power, and the reason they've gained so much territory, and it's something that the media outlets don't really touch on, is that Afghanis and most people in general, they don't want to be controlled by a foreign puppet, somebody, and that's ultimately what the Afghani government that the Americans tried to prop up was. It was very much a pro-America kind of thing, and it shared this Western values. And obviously, you know that um, the Afghanis and so forth are most Middle Eastern people. They like their cultures, their traditions, and so forth. They believe in a certain way and so forth. I mean, that's how they've been living for years, and that's eventually how they intend to live for another 100 years. So
Yeah.
it's almost pure ignorance to just assume that they'd like change their whole cultures because the West has said they should. So I think that's also something that gets glossed over. There was a puppet government in place, and they didn't have the support of the majority. And this was almost doomed to fail, because I mean, if you look at history, throughout history, I mean, look at in Rwanda, for example, right? The colonial powers, I think it was Belgium, correct, if I'm not correct, they propped up the Tutus when Tutsis instead of the Hutus with the majority. They favored one ethnic group over another. And it's a whole nother kettle of worm whether you look at the different sects of Islam within it. I mean, the Shiites, the Sunnis, and so forth. So that's a whole new kettle of fish in its own. But I mean, we've learned it ourselves here in South Africa. If you don't give each tribal group or somebody some kind of representation, then it's all going to go fail. So I mean, for example, we saw with the Zulus, if the Zulus are out of power in South Africa, then obviously they're going to feel, a bit hurt, and that's going to cause unrest. So I think, to be a successful, diverse country, you need to represent each and every person. You need to have somebody from every tribe and so forth. And I think that's one of the big issues that the West kind of glossed over, and they didn't really look at. Then another point that I just want to reaffirm, there is this worry that, oh no, what's going to happen now in the wake of the US and NATO withdrawal and so forth. And one of the stipulations that, like, I think Donald Trump tried to push forward, and that's been in talks, is that Taliban can't harbor terrorists. And they've said so, and they've also said that this is gonna be the Taliban of old. This is gonna be Taliban Lite, like Pepsi Light. This is gonna be Taliban Lite. So you take that for what you will. Maybe people don't trust them because they've had this massive history, but they've said they won't harbor terrorists. So the proof is in the pudding, I guess. But there has been examples where there's still sects of Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, and the Taliban have actually fought them, right? And they've been waging wars against them. The same with these infighting between Al Qaeda and ISIS, and they've actually fought them. So these three groups don't really like each other. The Taliban's don't like Al Qaeda or ISIS, right? So I mean, if that makes any evidence or proof that maybe they won't tolerate this, fair enough, I guess. But they also don't have the infrastructure to kind of man the whole country, so be that as it may, I guess.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to quickly piggyback on that point you just made now regarding the Taliban's links to ISIS and Al Qaeda, because now, as I said earlier before, your concerns about what could possibly happen next, now that the Taliban is back in power, and as it was previously showed and said a number of times before, that the country of Afghanistan served as a sanctuary for many of these terrorist groups and parts of Pakistan as well. And we've also seen a number of players within that region as well, serving as kind of saviors towards the Taliban, allowing them to have money, allowing them to sell their goods and services, allowing them to actually be propped up and actually survive and thrive. So now there's a concern about what happens next then for the West, especially because if you look at it, NATO, the US, parts of Canada as well, Australia as well, those countries have spent the last 20 years or so in Afghanistan, and then there are concerns now about what could possibly happen next regarding terrorism. But we've also seen the Taliban come out and say, we are doing kind of a blanket approach whereby everyone is forgiven. We won't be killing anyone or putting anyone to jail, whatever the case might be. But then reports on the ground are contrary to what we've seen before, seen or heard here the Taliban say. And also as well, they said people can leave the country as they wish. But then reports are claiming that the Taliban is taking over 3 gates at the airport. So it's quite a number of things happening, right? So in your case, right, from where you stand right now as someone who's gone through the work, someone who's got undergrad to show for it, do you think there's a new threat in terms of the Taliban and terrorism for the West and Australia as well? Do you think there's a new threat that they should be worried about?
So that was like a very loaded question, you know. The question is first, or the statement rather is, are we going to let the Taliban actually rule for a little bit and see how they do, or are we just going to be presumptuous and just take it from there, you know? Because people, you know, would you rather be reactive or proactive, you know? That's going to be the defining feature here, you know. Sleepy Joe has come out and said that they're going to avenge the deaths of all the soldiers that they lost and so forth. And is that going to open up a whole new kettle of worms? Are they going to bomb the infrastructure now, the helicopters that the Taliban have just acquired? And I saw a very interesting point, and I'm going to share the graphic shortly. But the Taliban, you know, I don't know if the Americans were sleeping or whatnot, but you should see the munitions and the artillery and everything that the Americans and the Allies left behind. You know, we're talking tanks, armored Humvees, you know, 4x4s, thousands of rifles, cash, and so forth. And that kind of leads to the question as to, like, should we be wary of them? Because, you know, the reports are saying that, you know, this is the first terrorist organization that has an air force. And, you know, it's funny, but it's kind of true. However, the military experts are saying that it doesn't really mean much because the Taliban doesn't know how to fly airplanes. And so there's a presumption that they're going to force the Afghani aviators to fly by pressuring the families. But, you know, everything breaks down. So once the planes stop working, you know, there's always maintenance on these kinds of aviation items. So there's a fear that it's not really a big deal in terms of the aviation wings, right? I mean, it's easy to shoot a gun and you fix a gun and so forth, but like planes and like these rockets and these bombers and so forth, you need technical expertise, and so there's no real fear in that, you know. And people have said that the Americans have kind of removed pivotal pieces from these planes and so forth, so they can fly, but I don't think they can shoot and so forth. So like these are going to be a wear and tear. So there is no real worry in that regard. But there is a worry that with the amount of munitions and artillery left behind, that's going to find its way onto the black market, and it's going to be sent to all kinds of insurgencies around the world. And that's one of the biggest fears, right? But in terms of actual threat, I think that this is my opinion, right? The Taliban is in power now, and I think they want to kind of live it up. You know, they want to enjoy what they've been fighting for 20 years. So I don't think I don't think that they're going to want to, you know, start harboring terrorists again, because, you know, they saw it done. So history can repeat itself. So I think for maybe 5 years or so, like, we'll see them just, you know, we don't know what Taliban Lite is going to be like, but I don't think they're going to be pressuring other states or harboring terrorists that think, you know, as if Bob, who lives in the Afghani mountains, bombs Pakistan, they'll be like, there's Bob, take him, you know, that kind of thing. I don't think there's going to be much resistance, because people are tired of war. You know, it's not just the Americans who are tired of war. It's not just NATO, the Europeans. The Afghani people are tired, you know. They've been at war since before they were born, you know. They're born with an AK in their hand. So I think that people are tired, and so you know, this is all hearsay and so forth, but if the, you know, it's going to be tit for tat right now. If the US responds to too heavy, you know, obviously they have to do, you know, with Soleimani, the Iranians responded by bombing like poor infrastructure of the Americans, and like it was just like to save face. So I think Sleepy Joe will save face, but I don't think it'll be pivotal infrastructure. And I think if he does damage pivotal infrastructure, then the Taliban are going to be forced to respond, because they can't obviously be seen as a pushover. Because there are so many, you know, if the Taliban gets seen as a pushover, then Al Qaeda or ISIS, it's like a domino effect, you know. If the Taliban aren't strong and have a united front, right, then the Taliban, the Al Qaeda and ISIS and all these other radical groups will take advantage and be like, hey, there's a state with weapons now, guns, let's just take them over. So there has to be a united front. And I hope the brains trust, and I think the brains trust in the Taliban will be like, hey, let's back down. However, you see the backlash that the Americans are getting right now. And I don't know if you want to touch on that now or maybe later in the show, but the actual people that have served in Afghanistan and all these Americans and vets, you know, I follow a couple of guys on social media, and they've purchased tickets themselves and flew out to go rescue all these Afghani interpreters and all these people that actually helped them when they were fighting these wars. And I think, you know, there was one thing that I want to touch on, that when you're talking about how Taliban said that they won't stop people from leaving, but these like a brain drain, you know, and they won't let all the top doctors and all these like people leave, because then what kind of state will they have, you know?
Exactly.
So I think, you know, that's within reason. Like maybe they'll let the kids go, but I don't think they'll let like all the male age fighting males or like doctors and engineers. They won't let them leave, to be honest. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been looking at, because everybody said, hey, they'll take in people. And I found it very interesting that on the list of people who are accepting Afghani refugees, America's only 22nd on that list. Everybody else is accepting them like left, right, and center. So I found that very interesting, man.
Yeah, but look, there's quite a number of elements when you come to looking at the Taliban. Before we move on, right, you spoke of a graphic that shows what was left behind by the US and allies. And I'd like us to quickly look at that graphic, if you have it up, so you can kind of see what was left behind and where the Taliban stands in terms of armory and the hordes of cash that are left behind. I'm sure they're all billionaires by now.
Yeah, so as you can see, 43 MD 530 helicopters, 33 AC 208 planes, 33 Black Hawks, 23 29 light attack planes, 32 M17 helicopters, and 3 Hercules, you know. And this is kind of where they're all situated, right? And that's just in terms of where they're allocated. We've got at least 3,012 Humvees that the Taliban has inherited. I mean, so you're looking at more than 4,000 M4 carbines. You've got 31 mobile strike force vehicles. It's crazy, you know, and that's just a few of it. I couldn't find that cash graphic that you wanted me to show.
Yeah, no, that's fine, man, that's fine. But I think people get the picture as to what was left behind.
Yeah, and that's just, you know, a tip of the iceberg, because you need to realize that, for example, the US has been supplying the Afghani National Army with weapons and so forth. So they've still got that stockpiles. There's still thousands of like hand grenades, thousands of other, not just this graphic of weapons left behind. There's entire armories that were left. And this, you know, this poses the question, you know, before we go on to your next point, right?
Yeah.
Is this very interesting documentary on YouTube by DW Documentary, and it is called the $1 Million Base, right? Camp Bastion, right? And so, we've been talking about, the US has always been talking about withdrawing from Afghanistan, when it was going to end and so forth, and when it was going to end. And this stems from Obama's administration already, that we're going to withdraw, right? So if withdrawal was on the cards, right, from that long, why are we leaving so many munitions and armories behind if this is actually what you're worried about? Why is it a last minute thing? And you can't tell me that all the Americans left there and all the allies were all essential workers. No, there were some non-essential people there. You can't have 50,000 essential workers. No, it's fucking probably like 5,000 or 10,000. And there was no long-term thinking. And I find this very interesting because this documentary, this $1 Million Base by DW Documentaries, looks at Camp Bastion, right? And the Camp Bastion was this $1 billion base set over like 8 hectares. There was an airport, there was a hospital, there was massive cafeterias and everything. And basically, the British disassembled every nut and bolt, and they shipped all of that shit back. Right, I'm telling that when you change salt water into drinking water, what's the
desalination plant?
Yeah, they had a desalination plant that took, I think it took 3 billion to set it up, and they took that entire thing down, and they literally every nut and bolt was accounted for and taken back, and they just left the bunk beds. They literally left the Afghanis, the towers around the base. Right? They left some bunk beds and a couple of TVs, like just basic stuff like kitchen appliances and stuff, so forth. But they took everything important, and they started stripping in 2015. So, if you just contrast that kind of approach to what we're seeing now with Americans, and it kind of leads me to think that this isn't, as much as we might put this on Sleepy Joe and so forth, because they said that whole dismantling process took 2-3 years, right? So you need to look at the strategic vision, right? Obama had to be like, okay, let's start dismantling our stuff. He had to get the ball rolling so that Trump could get the ball rolling to withdraw. You can't. Biden's been in office for 6-7 months, maybe
7 months, some in that region in 7 months.
7 months and some change. So he couldn't have started this whole dismantling process if there's, if we departing, the due date is the 11th of September, right?
Yeah,
that's the due date that he had to be out. So you couldn't say fucking in January, hey, especially with COVID now, the ball game's changed.
Exactly.
But he couldn't say, hey, this is how we need to dismantle. And I urge everybody to go watch the documentary, $1 Million Base, on DW Documentary, and it shows you how everything they're packing up. Everything gets packed up. Like they just left empty hangars and everything. It was just, they scraped it, and this was filmed in 2016. So it just shows you the foresight by some nations, right? And obviously, what the British did in that regard was they left the cafeteria for last, because obviously the troops still need to troops still need to eat and so forth. But the armed guards around that, and then everything went down to the non-essentials. I mean, they had a plant, right? A recycling plant, right? And every phone, laptop that wasn't needed, they destroyed. They had like a whole unit where they just destroyed stuff. Everything was taken apart, scrap metal was put aside. They literally destroyed everything. And they had a whole recycling plant. As much as we talk about how in South Africa we'd have a recycling ministry where we make money out of it, that's what the British did. So, it's almost foolhardy to say, why didn't we do this? When our America's allies had the foresight to do this. So yeah, I just found that very interesting in terms of that graphic, because everybody's going to put this on the Biden administration, and the Republicans are saying, fuck, he needs to be removed as commander in chief. And maybe so, because he's fucking slow, but it's hard to say that the buck ends. He destroyed Afghanistan in the withdrawal, because it's been in the works. The original agreement wasn't. And that it's so rare to see like a continuity plan. You look at the Europeans, they love having a continuity plan. So I give you a report, and this is what I did in my administration, and then you build on that. But with Obama, Trump destroyed everything. Like, he tried to erase the memory of Obama so that he could start fresh. There's no continuity plan. I mean, you see it in South African politics as well. Jacob Zuma, then you have Cyril Ramaphosa, two different mindsets. Thabo Mbeki to Jacob Zuma, two different mindsets. Nelson Mandela they weren't building on each other's legacies, and that's ultimately what's resulted in the failures that we see in South Africa, because there was no continuity plan. And this continuity plan, like Bush started this whole debacle, and you'd have thought that Obama would have consulted with Bush, and they would have had, previous presidents meeting. We'd be like, listen, I tried this. This is what we're trying to do. Exactly. Yeah. And we're obviously going to touch onto it later. I feel like we've been talking for a while now, but each had their own kind of vision for this, right? So Bush, for example, he wanted fucking entire armies. It was just everybody being deployed, right? You're talking Marines, infantry, the Air Force, special forces, and so forth. Whereas Obama promised that you'd end the war, so he reduced the infantry and the grunts, the cannon fodder, and he just put special forces in. So from Obama's administration, from 2011 to when he was Obama in presidency till 2018.
Somewhere, I don't really remember, to be honest.
2017.
I think it wasn't it 2016, because then Trump would have been in power 2016, 17, 18. Yeah, somewhere, 2016, I think, yeah.
So from when Obama came into presidency, he started in 2009, sorry. Obama started 2009, I think. Anyway, since he came to power, it was just, he had more of a special forces flavor. I mean, we saw with SEAL Team 6 taking out Osama bin Laden and so forth. He liked using the special forces. They were specialized troops, and it meant that the morale wasn't affected. If a SEAL dies, bravery. But if the regular Joe dies, then it kind of has that lasting impact, because you're losing more grunts. The cannon fodder, that's the people, that's your constituency. So he kind of reduced that so that the public opinion wouldn't be too damaged, and he vowed to reduce the troops, and that's ultimately what he did. With Trump, it was balls to the wall again, but obviously with drone strikes and so forth. And it's important to know that Obama was Mr. Drone Strike himself, the most drone strikes out of any presidency and bombing. So and I think this vision has just been lacking, and that's ultimately what resulted in it, because they didn't trust the Afghanis to empower themselves, and that's ultimately, that's why the Afghani National Army left, because how do you stay in power when every person on the corner wants to kill you? Then it obviously means that you're not supporting the united vision of Afghanistan and so forth.
Yeah, man, you've captured quite a number of points, probably some of the points I wanted to make as well, but look, that's besides the point. And that's the thing, right? There's a documentary I watched as well, whereby the troops, the Afghani troops, also had this problem of not being able to take control of activities, and most of the times the US troops would be there that have to take control. So it's fair to say that when the US troops started pulling out and there was no leadership in place, things are bound to fall apart. And that's where the problem is. For the most people, the problem is not that the US pulled out, it's how they pulled out, the timing. And as you said, about 2-3 years ago, some countries started pulling out, deconstructing the infrastructure, taking things back home, trying to take as much as they possibly can. Whatever's could possibly prove face will be taken back and away from the war zone. But now that's where the problem is, right? Because you spoke about the importance of infrastructure as well, because now some factions in the US are saying that the US must go back and bomb all the bases, bomb all the ports, the key roads. It's going to be it's not so easy anymore, because now you're starting from scratch again. because you're going to have to bring in the troops. They know you're coming in. They're going to plan ahead. They have the guns. They have the planes. They have the money, and they have the backing of other countries as well that might possibly send in troops, put them in Taliban clothing. They're properly trained. They've got experience, and they can fight the US. And that's the thing. The US has made quite a number of enemies in Asia, specifically Middle East and Asia as well, Far East Asia. And some countries are explicit about it. Some countries in the Middle East are blatantly saying we hate the US. Some countries are choosing to be a bit discreet for trading purposes and whatnot. But the point is, there's quite a number of countries that want to see the US fall. And that's why then you see that there's speculation of China, of Russia, and Pakistan partnering up with the Taliban to help them establish a government that works. Some reports are claiming that within Afghanistan, the only embassy to be harmed and damaged was that of the US, but that of Russia and China remains intact and in place. So that in itself paints the picture of the factionalism between the countries. And remember, all these countries sit on the UN Council. So now if you have China and Russia partnering with the so-called terrorist group, and the US and allies saying these people are terrorists and the enemies, then what happens next within the UN Council itself? Because now this Taliban thing can easily devolve into the UN Security Council.
I just want to touch on a point that you made, so the point clear there, you know, how the Russia and China embassies weren't harmed. And, you know, I was listening to this podcast and in his book, Yuan Rath. He's an ex-South African Special Forces who did a lot of contracting work in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he told me that, he stated that, the indigenous forces, the Afghans, the Iraqis, and so forth, they love anybody that's not part of the actual invasion team. So, they're not Americans, they're not British and French. So, they love the South Africans, they love the Chinese, they love the Fijians and Samoans, because they don't see them as the invaders and the conquerors. And that's kind of the attitude, you know. If you've been killing the people for so long, obviously they're going to say fuck you, you know, we'll bomb your place, you know. Whereas if Queensland's there, if South Africa's there, South Africa was, what did you guys do? Were you here, you know? So that's also something that gets glossed over, you know. I mean, that's why we've seen these reports why the Germans were able to escort South Africans out freely. The Polish were able to, because they weren't the main, they were there, but I mean, they were, you know, quietly doing
not the
stuff.
Instigators as such.
They're not the instigators, right? So, you know, there's pictures and videos of how the Dutch special forces were there escorting their people out, the Polish, all these other Europeans, the Australians were there, the New Zealanders, and you know, they were able to do the work because they weren't the main instigators. And I think that's something that, you know, the Americans are still so shocked. Oh shit, Afghanis hate us. Oh, no shit, you fucking bombed them, you know. Do you think the Iraqis no, you know?
Come on.
Exactly. I mean, do you think the Vietnamese still like you? No, they don't, because you killed so many, you know. So it's almost like there's this switch, this the savior complex that they have, where they're like, oh, but why do you hate us, you know? So and it's those scars, because the country's got so many scars, you know, and there isn't that healing, and obviously they're going to be upset about this and that, you know.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point, man. And I think with the presence of President Joe Biden, let's call the man by the name, let's not call him Sippy Cup or Sleepy Joe or Beijing Biden, all the names he has. Let's call him President Joe Biden. And with the presence of Joe, the weakness is now highlighted. You can see now there's a focus on a number of issues that are considered non-issues by some people within the right wing. Some issues like gender and other factors as well, critical race theory and all these things. There are problems, yes, but some people believe they're not an immediate problem to look at. I remember at one point, Joe visited an army base in the US, and he was speaking to them, and he said, he spoke to one of the generals, one of the high commanders of the army, and he asked him, what is the main threat for the US army and the US people? And the general told him it's global warming. So with the man who has that kind of thinking, we can only expect for him to pull out in the way he did from Afghanistan. And I think it's very important at this point in time to look at the kind of costs, the human cost and the monetary cost that came with the occupation of Afghanistan. So I've got something here that highlights the estimates. These are estimates, it's not the exact number. These are estimates, not the exact number of the number of lives lost, and you'll be astonished. Let's give this a look. The human cost. So American service members killed in Afghanistan, 2,448. US contractors, 3,846. Afghani National Military and Police, 66,000. NATO and allies, 1,144. Afghan civilians, 47,245. Taliban and opposition fighters, 51,191. Aid workers, 444, and journalists, 72. So now you can imagine these numbers have obviously risen now with takeover the Taliban. A number of people have been killed recently. So these numbers have definitely had a bit of a rise. Yeah, man, what's up?
I just want to ask you a question, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we know our Geneva Convention, the UN Charter article, I think it's 2 verse thing. Isn't there a byline? It's in bold, proportionality.
Yeah.
So, you know,
the principle of proportionality. Yeah.
Exactly, the principle of proportionality. So, after 9/11, the US was allowed to respond by international law, right? The US was allowed to self-defense, they were allowed to attack, but within the same proportion of 9/11 and the Twin Towers, right? So, for example, I just want to, you know, if you can bring up how many people died in the Twin Tower attacks, right? So, if we can just contrast those two, and I want to look at the proportionality of this, you know, it should be an eye for an eye, but I think this was just bomb and fucking kill them all, you know. And, you know, the US has always been one to kind of go overboard. I mean, Pearl Harbor, and then you have fucking a nuclear bombing. So, you know, they've always been one to punch way harder than they need to. And I think that, you know, if it was a proportional attack, I think we wouldn't be in the place that we are at right now. I mean, they fucking just bombed the shit out of these guys initially, then it would have been like, oh, okay, that's done. But it's the mission statement, and just before we gloss over this, right? The military industrial complex was hard at work. I mean, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole and talk about Iraq and so forth, but they were looking for weapons of mass destruction, and they're still looking for those fucking weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had, and they still apparently, you know. So, I mean, I sent you this article in a week where this former CIA deputy, he apologized to Colin Rath for lying to the UN. Like, he thought that the information that there was weapons of mass destruction, and he didn't. And Colin Powell said, listen here, you ruined my reputation by me going to the UN and telling them all this cuck, you know? If they're apologizing now, then, you know, how must the Iraqis feel?
Exactly.
Nobody says, oh,
after the matter of,
you know, so, yeah.
And look, I've managed to pull up the number of victims who died because of the 9/11 attacks. Now, it's key to note, right? Of the deaths, this also includes terrorists as well, so it's not only Americans. So the number stands at about 2,977. That's an estimate. Obviously, you can't get the exact number of these kinds of things. But they state that 246 people died on the airlines that flew into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the field in Pennsylvania. The attack on the Pentagon claimed 125 lives, and the attacks on the World Trade Center claimed 2,606 lives. So let's take a round number of 3,000, right? About 3,000 people died in total, including the terrorists, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, the whole thing. That's about 3,000 people in total. But now if you look at the number of people who've died in Afghanistan, the number of US people alone, US contractors who've died alone is above 3,000 mark. The number of the Taliban that has died is 51,000. Proportionality.
And you know,
the principle of proportionality, what's happening there? Because a quick one, right? This means that if it's in proportion, then it must be somewhere in the region of. Not too high, a bit low, that's fine, but not too high than what was meted on you as the victim. Yeah.
I mean, we'll give you 1,000 over, but I mean, fuck, what's it like 40, 50, 60,000 over? No, 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 no. And
Yeah,
I think that's also, and these are um, cute numbers. These aren't the real numbers because we all know that Obama was going to show you how many innocent civilians he killed us. You know, they stopped counting numbers after that. You know, not all bomb strikers. These are kind of cute numbers. You know, these aren't the
yeah,
real numbers. In my opinion, I strong with all the literature I've read and stuff, people I've
it's
spoken
way
to.
more.
uh, These numbers are fucking way higher. So you know, and this is just numbers published by the US. You have to look at the British was there, the
Exactly.
French was there, the Spanish was there, the
The
Polish,
Dutch.
the Europeans, everybody was there. So like, what are their
Mm,
numbers as well?
exactly.
And
Exactly.
the you know private military contractors are my bread and butter, and they don't report private military contractor numbers because they don't want to damage morale.
Mm,
So that's also something that you need to look at. But yeah, these numbers don't match up, but it's just the law of proportionality, and that's the by clause of the international law. You know that it needs to be within the same proportion and threshold. Um, and I think there is a limitation on how long you can use that. I mean, there is an expiration date of how long you can be self-defense, you know. Um,
mm.
so I think that's also something very important to note. And
Yeah, and this, yeah, go for it, man. Go for it.
there's just one thing: America didn't set itself up for success, right? And I spoke about a continuity plan, a strategic vision, and so forth, right? But you know, so they trained certain troops, but they didn't give them the training troops the training that they needed, you know, right? You know, the Green Berets, the American Green Berets, their whole functionality is to train the indigenous troops, right? So they teach them
Mm,
training, tactics, and weapons and so forth, right? But it obviously comes at, you know, Ian Barlow, the ex guy of executive outcomes, a private military contractor. You know, he had a successful executive outcome, set the standard for Blackwater and so forth, right? And he was saying that when you train indigenous troops, right, you have to be on their level, right? You can't have an area of superiority. The Americans obviously came in there with an air of superiority, right? You know, when he
mm.
said that when he trained the troops, right, these guys live in the exact same tent as the indigenous forces. They eat the exact same thing, right? You can't,
Yeah,
and you teach them tactics with weapons that they have, right? So the Americans went in, teaching them tactics with drones and stuff like that. They don't have drones. So if you teach them tactics with drones, then how the fuck are they, you know, you teach them with
think.
the, exactly, you teach them with the AK-47. This is how you clear a building and stuff like that. But they didn't set themselves up for success, right?
Yeah,
If you know that you're obviously in an Islamic country, so right, you need to know that the people pray on a Friday. So how do you expect them to train on a Friday? The same goes with praying 5 times a day. If you don't welcome that and you're cognizant of that, then obviously it's not going to work. You're not going to gel. And I mean, if you eat pork in front of the people, obviously they're going to be upset. And there's various articles about Americans coming in there. You don't pay attention to the cultures. You know, if you rip the hijabs of women when you break into houses, obviously the masses are going to be upset. And I think that kind of understanding and the style of training was kind of at odds in. So they didn't really set themselves up for success, right? Obviously, there was rarities, and this is the exception. But the overall training plan of the Green Berets going in, right? There's many books that I've read about this, was that they went in there and the NA was just fucking useless, right? They didn't follow the way that the movement and so forth and so forth. But you need to understand, right? Afghanis and Asians are naturally smaller than most Westerners and South Africans and so forth, right? They've got a smaller build, so they can't carry 80 kilograms that the US troops carry and so forth. You have to adapt your program to your style of teaching and training to them. They can't adapt
exactly.
for you, and I think that kind of set the Americans up for failure is another one because there was no vision of what are we going to do with these people. I mean, if they don't know how to drive a Humvee, then you know If they don't have the petrol for the Humvee, then it's pointless teaching them how to do smash and grabs with the Humvee if they don't have those weapons, I mean, they left all these airplanes, but how many Afghans did you teach how to fly helicopters, So it's kind of that kind of thinking.
Yeah, and I think that kind of point highlights that all this not on the shoulders of Sleepy Joe. Yes, he was the one who pulled out, but then why did he pull out? Because he didn't just randomly say, hey, okay, folks, we're going to pull out. There was a pretext to that, right? And that was because President Trump had signed an agreement with the Taliban that I'm going to pull out by May. So Joe had two options, either to pull out, as promised initially by Trump, right? Or he could then go back in, send in more troops and try to clear more territory, and then have the Americans in Afghanistan for 20, 30, 40 years into the future. So Joe had to make a choice, either a pullout, which was the consensus among the government and the population as well. Most people wanted the end to these endless wars, or he could go back in again and then lose popularity. So he had to then balance the two out. So what does he do then, right? Because now you have to then think where he was coming from as well as a man. So obviously in my case, and look, that's the thing, right? Because now as you're trying to discover new things, you might find that there are a bit of problems in there. But as I was trying to say, the problem here is Joe had to make a choice, right? And all human, every day we make choices. Some we make them out of routine, don't even think about brushing your teeth, making a sandwich, driving a car. But some things you think about though, when you write your thesis, when you talk to your partner, when you try to make a proposition to your parents or a friend, or trying to sway someone in a particular direction, you have to think critically about that to say, which words do I use or what actions do I take? And that's the thing Joe had to do. Which words does he follow? Do I follow the words of pulling out or the words of going back in and then bringing in more troops and then being in Afghanistan for a couple of more years? And he had to make a choice. And most people are saying, yes, it was good for him to move out, which is what was the point initially. But then how did he move out? So now it's a bit of a rock and hard place, to be honest.
He wasn't going to win. There was no winning in this.
There's no winning because if you went back in, the Taliban then is going to go on the offense again in a way that has never been seen before. If he pulls out hastily, this happens.
Yeah.
So what is Joe to do then? That's the question. What is Joe to do? It's a difficult position.
To be honest, I thought he thought he was going to be president, and then he was going to die in the next 2 weeks, and then it was just like, ask him a list problem. To be honest, like,
exactly.
I don't think, like, if he had everybody knew that. Listen, this year is going to be a make or break year. So, you almost wanted to say, hey, look, let Trump take this one, and then you can. I mean, the Republicans are calling for blood. You've lost. It's important to note that half of America was in Afghanistan and Iraq. Half of the people served and stuff like that. So obviously you are going to piss almost half the country off by saying,
and more.
Hey, exactly, right? But like abandoning people. So like there was no winning in this situation, right? And I think especially now that they've been attacked again, he's stuck in rock and hard place because he promised that he would stop the endless wars, right? But if he goes back now and does a U-turn, the Allies aren't going to join him because, you know what, you didn't plan, right? The British are like, we dismantled and you didn't follow suit. Exactly. So this is going to be Iraq 2002 over again, circa 2002 again, where the Allies didn't go into Iraq. Was it Gulf War? One of the wars, right? The Gulf War, where the US didn't have any allies to go in with him because it was unjust. And it's hard to say how he's going to. There needs to be a response because the US has already kind of lost their footing at center stage. But just by withdrawing, the manner in which they withdrew, right, has hurt them so badly. China came out. I know we're jumping topics far, but China came out and told Taiwan, you see what happens when you ally with the US. I mean, the balls on Xi to just come and be like, you see what happens when you ally. And this is kind of sent a warning to all the allies. Like, oh, shit.
Japan, India.
Especially because Japan, they've got self-defense units. They don't have an army, right? And they've always filed under the US security blanket. So, for example, if something were to happen with Japan, can Japan actually say, hey, listen, yeah, we need your help, yeah, you know, that kind of collateral. These so many agreements and so many people tied and invested into the American. So, you know, for example, in my mind, the French are sitting pretty comfortably because they have the nuclear weapons, they have a strong military and so forth. The Germans and so forth. These independent states, I mean, the Aussies and the New Zealanders, they're safe because they have their own strong military and stuff like that. They've done the investment, but Southeast Asian nations and everybody that's so reliant on the US, this should be a warning to you. Like, did I get into bed with the wrong person? Because what can you say if this is what they're going to do to the Afghans that they've been fighting and serving with? It's going to be a haphazard leave and half the people clinging onto planes. I don't think the Japanese and Taiwanese are going to cling onto a plane and say, hey, help us out, you know? So it was the manner in which, you know, you could have asked, hey, can we push back the deadline, or let's just ramp up these dismantling processes. But to leave with your tail between your tails, I mean, having a lost gunfight at the airport. No, I mean, it was peace. Like the unrest has stopped in the last 8 months or so because the Taliban knew, oh shit, the Americans are leaving, so why fight them, you know? There was a 1 or 2 skirmishes here and there, but like it's always been on there's been a massive decline. So to go and have one last firefight at the airport with like thousands of people clinging to the planes, the US just hurt themselves way more. You know, if you look at that whole event, the last 2 weeks, this has been free publicity for the Taliban, and they should just be sitting back. They shouldn't even be at the airport. They should be sitting back with popcorn. I don't know if they eat popcorn, but sitting back and just watching the shit show.
Yeah. And that's the thing, man. It's all about planning, because I'm sure the Taliban would have been willing to renegotiate. And I think trying to push back the exit dates from Afghanistan would have allowed the creation of a balanced state whereby you have a government that's for the people, with President Ghani in power, if that would have been the case, and then some sectors of society controlled by the Taliban, whatever that might have looked like. I'd say give them defense. They're allowed to carry their guns, they go on the ground, they like to do the fighting. So give them defense and let them be in charge of the defense ministry. Because that was the whole situation. Trump was trying to negotiate for a coalition government whereby there's part of it is the people and part of it is the Taliban. But now with this pullout, it became a takeover. And that's why then we find ourselves where we are now. So I think what was wise to try and renegotiate the exit dates, because as it is, people did support the leaving of Afghanistan by US troops, because some reports state that over the past 18 months before the exit, no one had died from the US Army. So that shows that the Taliban was willing to play ball if you sit down and talk to them like human beings with the adults. Because as it stands, the amount of money spent is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Reports state that between 2010 and 2012, there were 100,000 soldiers stationed in Afghanistan, $10 billion a year. That's a whole lot of money. And a whole a range of other numbers as well. Some people say it's $1 trillion war. Some of the numbers don't include some of the bases outside of Afghanistan that are also used to try and then put the Taliban to rest and put them to bed. And all these problems come into effect because now, what about the allies? What about the Quad? Because most countries don't have nuclear weapons because they believe that they fall within the umbrella of the US. But what happens now then in this case? So it's the effects, the reach, the implications of this particular exit are far-reaching. And I don't think we can cover all of them right now because we don't have the kind of time on our hands. But I think maybe in future, once everything settles down and we see what kind of government the Taliban puts into power, we can then start to speak about the kind of threats that lie ahead for countries like Taiwan, countries like Japan, India, countries that fall within the US nuclear umbrella, because it's absolutely insane. Because now we have to start thinking about this. What does this mean again for the upcoming elections. If a Republican comes into power, will they go back again to show their power, or what happens next? There's quite a number of things to consider. Yeah, what's up, man?
I also want to just highlight a point. Biden came out and he said he refused to take any blame for the mishaps, and I think that kind of ignorance and arrogance has also hurt him with the Republicans and many supporters in America, because you, or sadly, whether it was your doing or not, you are the last line. The buck stops with you, right?
As
And
you
you had a handle on how things ended, right? You know, Biden's the president now, and this is how they kind of packed up. They could have packed up way more, or like you'd have deployed more Air Force, or even asked your allies, hey, can you help us out? Can we all just lift our stuff out? And the manner in which, and him being unwilling to accept responsibility for the fuckery that happened in the last 2 weeks is, I think, going to end his presidency. He's very lucky that this didn't happen in his last year of office or something, because then I think it would have been the nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
And I think that that's another reason. You spoke about a coalition government and so forth. I don't know if you've read this book. I'm going to share my screen quickly.
Okay.
Share this book. I'll put it out. If you guys want me to send you the book, I can. It's License to Kill Hired Guns in the War on Terror by Robert Young Pelton, right? And he's a journalist that went out to Iraq, and he kind of looked at the situation, the numbers, how money was being spent on private military contractors, how the US looted the treasuries and so forth. Can you still see this Word document?
Yeah, got you. You can scroll down a bit.
Yeah. So, for example, right? All right. So, see, here we go. Right. Paul Bremer, right?
The screen seems to be frozen right now.
Let me stop sharing.
Because I'm still on the.
So, sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna go like this. Right? Can you see my screen?
Okay, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So Paul Bremer was an independent contractor coming into a position of power in May 2003, and he had the supreme authority to make sweeping changes and radical reforms to post-Saddam Iraq. All right. A seasoned diplomat was hired as a CEO of March Crisis Consulting, right? And he came in and so he pissed off the majority of Iraqis, right? He was viewed as a dictator, squandering Iraqi oil revenue on corrupt and wasteful foreigners from the same places where Saddam had squandered oil revenue. And, he went in there with like this economic shock therapy, and he basically used the Iraqi reserves as his own piggy bank,
Yeah.
And what I found fascinating was in 2003, Bush signed an executive order to confiscate all Iraqi property and give it to the United States, as well as the funds take funds out of banks.
The papal bull.
Exactly. And it's crazy how an executive outcome in America has the right on a sovereign nation, how you can just take the property. War doesn't allow for that. The Geneva Convention doesn't allow for that. And I don't know how people gloss over the fact that executive outcome is domestic law. It's not
exactly.
It's not international law. So I find that very interesting, because just imagine Xi declared like a executive order. Nobody's going to accept that because it's Chinese law. It's not international law.
He actually has. There's this new Chinese law that came out, I think, towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year, that covers a number of things, such as like insulting the states, the national anthem, insulting online, and all those things. And it does state that even if I myself, a South African, was to insult Xi, if I go to China, to be arrested for those actions. So we actually see that those kinds of laws come into effect across the world. That's why you find that most Americans are not keen to go to China, because as soon as they land and they've insulted China online, then they're bound to be arrested. And that's kind of thinking is kind of stupid, to be honest, because you're also domestic, not international. You're not the UN. Even the UN doesn't have power over sovereigns. So it's kind of stupid thinking.
And here's something Bremer came in and issued Order 1, which began with the de-Baathification of Iraq society. So the Baath party was about Saddam's party, right? And this banned all party members from any positions of authority and responsibility in Iraqi society, effectively ostracizing 10% of the Iraqi population between 1.5 and 2.5 million. They also disbanded the Iraqi army and several Iraqi ministries, essentially cutting off employment and income for over 400,000 Iraqis. These two orders essentially created a pool of unemployed potential foot soldiers or suicide bombers for the opponents of occupation. Yeah? And this is the kind of the ideas and the vision that America went into the Middle East with. And obviously they definitely use this tactics in Afghanistan. And this is what we see, this is a problem that we see because there's no vision. And this kind of harmful thinking is actually what set them up for the reason that they're in. Here it says, Baath party assets and businesses were seized. 100% foreign ownership and repatriation of profits were allowed. 40-year contracts intended to ensure that any ventures created under US occupation would endure. The banking system was privatized. A flat tax of 15% was created. Excise and duties were abolished. All of these orders were issued in English with the Arabic translation lagging behind, underscoring the growing impression that the American occupier was taking control of the country for its own selfish purposes.
That's colonization. Call it what it is. That's colonization, straight up.
Exactly. And this is kind of the attitude that's actually set up America for failure. If they had gone in there with a bit of humble pie and the cognizance that, okay, we're here for war, but we're going to treat these people with respect. And we're going to leave it as we kind of left it. But you look at these pictures, I don't know if you want to bring it up, of Afghanistan in the 70s, how it was lively, and now you just see the fucked up bomb cities. If you go and image Afghanistan before and Afghanistan after, there's a huge correlation and difference between the two.
And the thing is, man, let's call a spade, right? If I was to come to your house, say I was paying you a visit, I'd have to ask you where I must find certain things, how I can do certain things, because it's your house. I can't just walk in and assume I know where this is, where that is. You know your house best. So if you want to come into my house, you have to go through me first and say, hey, where can I find this? Where can I find that? As opposed to just walking in and thinking that you know everything. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. That's not sustainable. And look, this problem of American occupation has persevered and persisted for quite a number of time. We've spoken about a number of countries that have been paid a visit by the US, and most of them, if not all of them, have not been left in a better state. And when you look in retrospect, you find that most people say, it wasn't worth it. What we went for there wasn't actually there. So then why keep going there if you keep failing and going for things that weren't actually there? It's just pure insanity to me. So I've got a bunch of photos here that I've pulled up on my browser. I'm not sure if these are the photos you're speaking of. You can tell me if I'm wrong, right? And then you can pull up the ones that you believe are correct. Let me try to share my screen right now. So let's do this. This is the screen I'm looking to share. And then let's share that screen. Tell me if you can see that, right?
Yeah.
So you've got that, right? So it's a bunch of pictures that draw comparisons before and after. Let's see what's here. So here, complete ruin. Complete ruin. If you have a look at that, let's view the source, but that's Syria though. But that also highlights the points as well though. So let's quickly close that. Okay, astonishing pictures. Oh, come on.
Afghanistan 1967 to
yeah. But if you look at these pictures, right, and you can take a look at this one here, for instance, let's pull that up. Okay, that is pre-Taliban Afghanistan, is a pretty good place. you can tell that there was some sort of a good life. There you go, kids playing in the park. I doubt they can today. You can tell the number of cars on the road, people had cars, not just Humvees only. Let's take a look at this. Go side by side here. Let's see if we can pull that up. Okay, so yeah, there you go. Afghanistan 1969, lady there, 2013. Come on, man.
Come on. The proof is there.
It captures the point quite well. The writing is on the wall. And I think we've come to a time whereby, to break it, we've come to a time whereby we have to actually ask questions of the US and say, why do you guys keep doing this? What's in it for you? Ask the deeper questions. What's the point of you trying to invade the Middle East so much? What's the actual point? You wanted to make a point.
There's just one thing, you know, we look at what started World War II. It was reparations for war, you know, the Treaty of Versailles and so forth. And the Germans had to pay reparations, right? So where are these reparations? Because the reparations were used to rebuild, you know, France asked for reparations, and they asked for a lot because they were bombed to shit. And those reparations allowed for rebuilding. So almost you've got to ask the question, where were the reparations? I sent you a documentary in the week, right? Where they asked, you know, they just looked at the state of roads in Afghanistan. And, you know, look, roads are, we are supposed to be a developed country and we struggle with potholes. So like, we'll allow the potholes. But, you know, you look at the infrastructure that was meant to be built, you know, they did stupid projects and they built hospitals where there wasn't a need for hospitals. They built schools where there wasn't a need for schools, you know. They didn't build the infrastructure that, you know, it was almost like, oh, let's just waste money, corruption, and say this is your reparation payments. But there wasn't actual, you know, physical, proper development, you know. We didn't see the development that the Americans and the Allies promised. And I think that's something that gets glossed over, because what exactly, Afghanistan wasn't a win. And they've drawn correlations to how the US is departing with that of, you know, in Vietnam, when they departed of the embassy with helicopters, just as Vietnam, Saigon got taken over. They didn't win Vietnam and they didn't win Afghanistan. So what was the whole purpose of it, right? The Taliban is still there. Even after they try to defeat the Taliban, the place is just in worse shape. So you've got to ask the question, how do you see this as a win? And what did you actually bring to Afghanistan besides death and more radicalization? Because the end, I was about to say the NC, but
they're always there with the problems, always there with the problems.
Yeah, exactly. The NC fucking created the Taliban. But you know, you've got to ask, the US has to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, they recruited a lot and they radicalized a lot of people, you know, all the drone strikes that they did. If they killed a brother here, then obviously his brother's going to be pissed and he's going to go join the fight against you. The US was one of the biggest recruitment tools, you know, as much as they did badass shit and killed Afghanis and Taliban on one side, they recruited more, you know. And that kind of, just imagine I had to fight against Russia or India. Everybody's related. Just imagine you kill one Indian. There's how many people's in India? It's like fucking 1 billion. Like, it's a conveyor belt that you'll never beat. So exactly. So I think that kind of logic was, especially when you think about how important in Afghanistan and the Middle East, bloodlines are so important, right? And blood packs, and everything is about the family. They've got that whole old school mentality, you know, you have 10, 12 kids, right? So if you kill his one son, his other fucking 10 brothers are going to be pissed off and they're going to come for, and I think that gets glossed over. The US went and the West went in there with the things. They didn't learn from the mistakes that Russia made or the British. But yeah, that's kind of my opinion on this. And like you said, maybe we need to have a part 2 on this, because obviously let's just see how the first couple of weeks of leadership and governance is.
Yeah, look, man, it's kind of hard to talk about the US and its occupations in the Middle East without mentioning other countries and other groups as well, because all these things are related. They are linked together, and it's hard to talk about one in isolation. And that's in part to why we've gone this way and that way and that way and that way. But the hope is everyone gets the point that one, the US kind of broke all laws, international laws of war when it came to its occupying Afghanistan. You can look at the Geneva Convention from start to finish. You can see the number of laws they've broken. I'm not a lawyer, don't know the law that well, but I'm quite certain they've broken quite a number of laws of the Geneva Convention. The second thing is, it's the savior complex of the US can do no wrong, and wherever they go, they're allowed to do as they please. I see the sun is coming in now, and it's going to start slowly taking away my skin and my face, because now you look at that, but that's besides the point. But another thing is, it's that savior complex of coming in with the superiority complex as well, of saying, I know best, I'll eat my pork in front of you, and I'll tell you what to do, just do as I say. And that in itself creates a vacuum for leadership, because when you pull out, then there's no one left to fill the void. Above that, we've seen the US make enemies in Asia largely. They've made quite a number of enemies in Asia, and that in itself puts them in a bad position, right? Fourthly, it's this thing of playing politics. Bush does his own thing, Obama comes in with his own thing, Trump comes in, Biden, etc., etc. So this failure to have a plan of succession also then plays a pivotal part in trying to pull out successfully, because if you look at other countries that dismantled beforehand, even during transition, they were still able to maintain the pullout. And I think it's maybe this might raise the question of having the military be separate from the state, just as we had the church removed from the state. It might raise the question of saying the military must decide what is best based on what's happening on the ground, as opposed to someone's in Washington in their pajamas with Camp David. And above that, it's a matter of working with the allies as well, because now the allies might want to stay, or they're not done packing, and you say I'm moving out next week. So what does this mean then for other countries that depend on your umbrella of nuclear weapons or supports in case of attack? So there are all these prongs that come into play. And if you look at one prong, you're going to be pulled in one direction. Start looking at Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and what in Pakistan, whatever the case might be. Look at this, then you pulled into NATO, you pulled into Canada, Australia, and whatever the case might be, the Quad. So it's really hard to put a pin on things and say this is a matter of facts, because all facts have other matters that are related to them, right? But we've said a lot, we've done a lot. And I'd like us to kind of put this in the bow, not unless you'd like to capture something else before I try and present the bow. Are you okay for the bow?
No.
Great stuff. So the first thing I'd like us to kind of look at before we wrap this up, right? Was it ever possible to neutralize the Taliban? It's a simple yes or no question, and why? You can give me 2 or 3 lines, nothing much. Was it ever possible to neutralize the Taliban? Yes. Why? No. Why?
No, because they went in with the wrong approach. The vision was all wrong. This had to be a holistic war. You know, you had to go in there with a purpose, right? If the purpose was to punish them for harboring Osama, then they needed to go in, get Osama, and punish the people that let him stay in the house, right? That's kind of the proportionality, you know. I think that by sticking around for so long, there was no way they were winning. After the first 2 years that they were in, there's no winning the war, because it just kept on coming, and there was no continuity plan, you know. There's this book, I told you about this book, The American Sparta, right? The trial of and betrayal of Major Jim Gant. So he was a Green Beret, and I'm just gonna give you the headline, quick summary. And they said he must go on a mission, and he went to go live with the tribal people and he unified them, right? unified them, and slowly he started building a bigger pocket and pocket. And then eventually he controlled a large stretch of land, working with the people. He lived with them, he lived in a hut next to them, and there was no superiority complex. He worked just fine with them, right? And that's how he developed, right? He was a Green Beret and so forth. And towards the end of his tenure, because he decided to give up, he decided to live there actually. And the Americans said that he went rogue and so forth, but he started living. He even brought his wife over, and they lived in the mountains with these people. And the vision was that they were going to unify all the tribes together to actually have a unified Afghanistan, right? And then Obama came to era, and then the money started getting scrapped, and he couldn't continue to form and train these troops, these tribal groups that actually make up the large majority of Afghanistan, right? And this failure to actually come up with a vision, and so he was actually left behind enemy lines, and he had to fend for himself. And that kind of, if you tell the people to unite and fight for a cause, and then you leave them hanging, obviously they're going to be like, why the fuck, we risked our lives.
Point?
Exactly. And a lot of them, they fought the Taliban and stuff like that. All these tribal people, they've been fighting with them and showing them that they were with Americans and so forth. So they put themselves on the line, and then they just, 1 second, the funding was cut, and they were left out to hang and dry and die. And that happened to hundreds and thousands of Afghanis. They were left out to dry by the US. So, that this whole approach of fighting the war was wrong, and they didn't learn from it. That's why I say 2 years in, if they weren't out, then there was no way winning that war,
And I think that captures the point quite well. They were trying to fight an ideological war with weapons. And that's a mental war. That's the way the problem is. And I agree with you on this one. They didn't have a plan to try and neutralize the Taliban, because that's an ideology, it's a way of life. It was there before them. So you can't just neutralize this in a week or two, but you can maybe go for the problem people and say, this guy seems to be the problem, take him out, that guy, take them out, and then try to create a new ideology on the basis of now then kind of flatline Taliban, right? So you can't neutralize the Taliban, that's fine. And you've spoken about what could have been done differently in terms of the approach of how the US should have entered Afghanistan in terms of superiority, working with the people, living with the people, and all those things. But then now we have to then look inward, or not inward in our case, but at least look at the lead of the free world. Joe.
Yeah.
What happens next? What's next for Joe?
Joe obviously needs to save face, right? He really needs to save face. So we are going to see maybe, I wouldn't say more ground troops, but we are going to see an escalation in some form. Maybe it'd be a drone strike or something like that, right?
We've had one already.
Yeah. And this guy that I follow on social media, he went in, him and a couple of special forces guys, and they went in and rescued them. And he just put a post up this morning that all the airports are no-go zone. They're actually departing. He's been told he can't come back in now. It's done, right? So this begs my question, right? Now the US has a surplus of troops, right? You're losing income. As much as we wanted to say, hey, let's have a ministry of transparency and stuff, you need to feed the beast. If there's no money coming in from more, where are you going to find another avenue? So I think Sleepy Joe is going to find another war to fight, right? I'm sure they're in the works trying to find somewhere else, right? Because the military industrial complex isn't just going to shut down just like that.
Yeah.
So I think, Joe is going to find another place to fight. They have the $2 trillion US defense budget. Those generals and CIA aren't going to say, hey, fuck, let's give back the money now. It's not realistic. So that's just my two interpretations of that. What do you think?
I think Joe probably remain in power because as much as the media is screaming and shouting against them, but time is moving, and before you know it, the 31st will roll around, it will pull out, and people will try and forget about this slowly. The problem might arise if they leave behind a number of Americans behind the enemy lines. And then if that's the case, things might not look pretty for him. I think he might only lose power at the next elections. I think that's what probably going to happen as far as I can see. Because as far as I know, I might be wrong. As far as I know, I don't remember US presidents failing to complete his term. So even Trump, they tried impeaching him, but it eventually was able to complete his term as well. So the last day to the last hour. So I think that might be the same thing with Joe. Complete the term, next elections, he gets dropped by the population. And then in terms of Harris, I think, yeah, she's had a good run. She's done this and that, but that might be the end of her career. She might go back to state politics, and yeah, that might be it. And then the last one, the Taliban is now in control of Afghanistan. They're in control of the levers of power and the population as well. They've got some allies in China and Russia, Pakistan, and other nations we don't know of as well as of yet. What can we expect, or what should we probably expect from them? Because they've come out and said there'll be rights for females, they go to school, they get jobs, but obviously within the confines of Sharia law. What can we expect from them possibly?
Taliban Lite. No, that's the simple answer. I think seeing is believing, man. We can say, fuck, they're gonna let all the girls do whatever they want within the confines of the religion, but seeing is believing, and the key to the Taliban staying in power is them to stay united. And obviously, there's various sects within the Taliban, Sunni, Shiite, and so forth, the Pashtun tribes and so forth. So you have to find a compromise amongst everybody, because someone's strict Sharia law, so managing and negotiating that everybody remains unified on the same platform is going to be key. They need to forget about everybody else. That is going to be key to staying united and staying in power, right? I don't see radical advances for women. I really don't. But I think that, the Taliban has said that they will allow women into the government. But like I said, you won't see radical changes, but I think there will be appeasements and stuff like that.
And for the aid.
I mean, there was a one guy convicted. It's a Vice documentary. He got accused of stealing cattle and so forth. And they wanted his arm. So you're just going to see, they wanted his hand. So you are still going to see those punishments, and they're going to be harsh and stuff like that, because that's the law, the Sharia law. So you're going to see that, but I think we might see more reforms and stuff like that. So, but the key to them staying in power is it's a balancing act. They are going to have to appease everybody just to stay in the power. Within the Taliban, they're going to have to appease everybody within the Taliban.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to please within and without as well, because now you're going to have to then think about the aid as well, what your allies want from you, what China wants from you, because China has quite a dominant kind of approach towards the allies of saying, do X, Y, or Z, or, and that's where the balancing act comes in for the Taliban. Now, how do you then balance your Chinese friends and your American aid?
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see, but yeah, I think that's me for the day. Not unless if you're missing.
I just want to, before you tie this in the bow, I just want to end off with a couple of quotes, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So this is by Jeremy Hardy, and he was like, the Afghan war has clearly reached a similar stage. It's clearly reached a stage similar to that moment at your child's party, where you realize you've forgotten to give the other parents a pickup time.
Yeah,
I'll repeat that. The Afghan war has clearly reached a stage similar to the moment at your child's party where you realize you've forgotten to give the other parents a pickup time. Kids are running wild, and I thought they're very poignant, And then the upheavals in Afghanistan are not an Afghan thing. Its upheaval has roots outside the country, which eventually led to the country being a hub of terrorism with a different agenda. And then the final quote is, winning in Afghanistan is having a country that is stable enough to ensure that there's no safe haven for Al-Qaeda or for militant Taliban that welcomes Al-Qaeda. That's really the measure of success for the United States. So you've got to wonder, was it worth it? The misery in the water in Afghanistan is reminiscent of images from the 30 years old. So with those 2-3 quotes that I put out there, I think it's time to pick up the kids from the party, and
yeah, man. Let's say no more. We've said what we can for now. And yeah, let's park it there and then allow the folks to have a good one and stay safe. And important notes, the Taliban is not a terrorist group, it's a political organization, I think, given how they do things, economics, politics, aid and whatnot. So also factor that in whenever you talk about the Taliban, they're a political group, not a terrorist group. Factor that in as well whenever you talk about the Taliban.
100%. I think, thank you for actually acknowledging that. I think we also need to, I think we may have been very critical of America. And to anybody listening, like, we know the Taliban have done bad shit. And we know that that they've killed but I think the main crime should be that they harbored Osama bin Laden. Everything after that is after the fact, because after the invasion, then they're just fighting the occupying army. So we're not excusing what the Taliban did and so forth, but we
yeah. And a quick note, right? As much as they've done bad things, there's a reason why they survived for 20 years. They also had a bit of public support as well. That's important to note as well. The public support within the country as well for the organization.
100%. And reach out to us if you want to see the actual articles that we're talking about, the documentaries, the books. I'll gladly send them to your email address and so forth. Just so you know that we're not talking shit. We didn't come up with these numbers and so forth. Like, everything we did was, we try to be well researched and stuff like that. It may come across as like we like talking shit, which we do, but we try to talk shit with some sense in it,
Yeah. And that's the commission. Have a good one, folks.
All right, take care.